right, so I wanted to ask you quickly about the events on, I believe it was Friday night, where you were beaten by a gang of apparently Antifa people because they had claimed responsibility in an article, a provisional article that they had published, the North Shore Antifa. Um,
Yeah. Do you think they claimed responsibility, or do you think they just kind of celebrated it?
it seemed to me as they were claiming responsibility, they had made comments in their article that they were trying to say that you were inciting violence and that there
Yeah.
was a justified, and they would not apologize for beating somebody as yourself, um, that was inciting violence supposedly.
Yeah.
And
Doesn't surprise me.
no, so they did essentially accept responsibility for that, which was kind of alarming to me. But
I'll take a
so
look at that article again just to just see what it said, because yeah. But anyways, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. So no, I just wanted to find out. They had a couple statements that that they used to justify, quote unquote, justify their violence. Was they were using a video that you were streaming on Periscope, I believe it was, or Chris, one of your friends.
Yeah,
Um,
Chris was on Periscope, and me and the other girl were just kind of hanging out with him because he said he wanted to do a Periscope, and I've never actually done a Periscope before, to be honest. I don't have the app, but I've watched Periscopes from people before, so I know what it is and I know what it's about. But yeah, it was his Periscope that he wanted to do after we got kicked out of the bookstore.
okay. Yeah. So he was on the Periscope, and he was. I believe he made a comment. There were people commenting. It looked like on the Periscope saying, like something like, "Oh, punch commies" or something, and he
Yeah.
said something like, "Oh, that's his thing," and then you looked like you were reading the comment. It said looked like you were reading "punch commies," and you were like, "Oh yeah, fuck commies" or something. You said I don't know what you said. Um,
Yeah.
if
I
you
was
would
gonna
just wanted to
say,
clear that up, I don't know.
sure, yeah. So I honestly have no idea why he said that, because I've never advocated, punching anybody. Um, I I haven't actually talked to him about that, but yeah, somebody on the screen wrote that, punch commies, and Chris had said, "Oh, that's his thing," and so I was just playing along with everything, and I feel like it was pretty obvious by my voice that I wasn't like trying to condone it, and I still don't really condone using physical force unless you are defending yourself. But I mean, I just think this is absolutely ridiculous, because these people who say, "Oh, this is justified," they trash talk so much, and they will trash talk in your face and say things like this, and they won't even do anything. They'll say, say a lot of different things, advocating violence, flipping you off, all these different things, and so they advocate intimidation and violence, and then anytime you sort of, I guess, express any sort of frustration and joke about different things, I mean, does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I don't
So
think from the interview that I was advocating, beating these people up. I mean, I think people use these sorts of terms, in a very loose-ended way. But I mean, in the actual lecture itself, we did not, intimidate anybody specifically. We did not like go after anybody in the audience. We didn't, say anything of the sort, in terms of advocating violence against anybody. I mean, really, I think that Periscope was just blowing off some steam because we were met with such hostility. I mean, one of our friends got kicked out of the store, and then we eventually got kicked out, and we didn't even do anything.
right.
So, at the end, it was just kind of like playing along with the Periscope, because people say these stupid things online, and I don't know. And when
Right.
I
So
talked about the boots, I guess I said, these boots are perfect for commie ass whooping or ass kicking or whatever.
yeah.
Um, I never said what was in the article. So the articles by them said it was perfect for commie bashing. I did not say bashing. I said commie ass whooping And then after the stream was over, I said something like it would be nice, or something like you could just put a foot right up their ass. But I mean, to me, this just seems like trash talking, and I would understand if we did this, in the lecture or to somebody specifically, and was provoking these sort of things to a person. But to me, this was just playing along with the stream, trying to have some fun, trying to blow off some steam.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts about it? I mean,
well,
because I'm curious. Because the thing is like, I'm an open person, so if somebody feels like I did something wrong, I'm willing to at least accommodate that. But I just don't think that I did anything wrong. It maybe not have been the best comments, but people say stupid stuff like this all the time without any intent to hurt anybody.
Right. Well, I did notice in a few follow-up videos that Chris had published on Periscope that you were at the time of making that video that they had referenced, and they were supposedly had been watching because they had used it as justification for. They must have been simultaneously watching that video. I don't know if you knew the person who had made the punch commies comment.
I didn't know any of those people on his Periscope. I don't know any of. Yeah, I don't know any of those people.
Right.
I highly doubt that they were watching that Periscope at the time, because I assume that they were in the building trying to talk to Mark Bray, and I didn't even know any of those people were really, because it had been like a half an hour, I thought, since we had kind of gotten kicked out and since we sort of went back, but it might have been sooner, and I assumed most people had left. I mean, I believe the only reason we went back there was because there was another person that we knew in the lecture that we were looking to possibly talk to. But, I mean, so, also, I want to respond to the violence comment that Antifa supposedly claimed that, was provoking them to attack me. So in that lecture, I was also very friendly with all of these people inside. There was only one person that I confronted because they asked a question to Mark. They said, is drinking milk and Pepe the Frog a sort of dog whistle or something that we should be worried about? And I thought it was so ridiculous because this gets hashed over and over again. So I just said, the reason people do this is because they want to get a reaction out of you, and you guys get so pissed off about it. And she wasn't very happy with that, but that was it. I mean, that was the only, I think, interaction or negative interaction that I had with, and I guess when I asked my question to Mark, he didn't answer it. I asked him to answer the question. He moved along. One of the kids in the crowd started holding the communist flag, and I just said, fuck commies, or fuck communism, or whatever. So it's like I said, I think it's ridiculous that I'm somehow held responsible or somehow looked at in a negative view, when I specifically went there to challenge the views of the people there, and challenge the views of the author, and try to expose what he was doing. Right. And I was completely willing to talk to anybody after the event in a civil manner. Somebody came up to me and asked me if I was the organizer of the free speech rally. And I said, yeah, I'm the co-organizer of it. And as he was walking out, I specifically asked him, I said, hey, would you like to talk to me? And he walked away and said, no, I don't want to talk to you. The guy who was holding up the flag, who was like praising, communism,
mm-hmm.
We talked with him afterwards. Tyjon Wallace, I think is his name. And he's one of the main, from what I hear from Chris, he's one of the main organizers of the Antifa group. And we talked to him afterwards, and I talked with him. I said, hey, are we going to see you at the next free speech rally? And he said, yeah, probably. And I said, well, I guess I'll see you on the battlefield, my friend. And Chris had made a comment that said, he said Tyjon is a cool commie, or he said something of that sort. He said, at least he's willing to talk. Taizong was surprised about that. He's like, wow, a Trump supporter says that a communist is a good person. And I told him, I said, we don't want to hurt you. We don't want to commit violence. We don't hate you. We just want to have a dialogue. And after we made those statements and on the way out, Taizong had told Chris, he's like, I guess I'll be in touch with you on Facebook. So this claim that we were there to provoke some sort of violence, I think is absolutely ridiculous, because the heckling that we did, the loudest heckling that we did, was after the event was over. So the question and answer was over, and I started saying Trump, 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 build the wall, as kind of just like a fun sort of thing. And mostly because they got so upset about my question when I said, is communist fascism worse than the fascism that Antifa was supposedly fighting against? Since communist fascism, which I believe that communists developed into fascism under the regimes of Stalin, Lenin, Mao. I don't think I know of a single communist regime that didn't develop into fascism at some point, because the whole structure was destroyed.
Right.
People were revolting. They started throwing people in gulags. The people who actually owned land and property didn't want to give that up. So they started, the kulaks, I think is what they call them. The kulaks started revolting, and they started getting thrown in gulags and being murdered. So it's like, I wanted to, because I've been to different events like this before, and I think that is perfectly reasonable to, and this was even stated, I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit.
No, it's okay.
It was a question that was kind of stated in the lecture itself, was shutting down free speech is probably not a good idea, but a little bit of heckling is fine. And as far as what I remember, I might have to go back into that video of Mark Bray.
No, I think I did see that. I think he did make that comment.
Yeah, and he expressed no, not concern, but he didn't have any negative comments towards people who do a little bit of heckling, from what I saw in the video. And I don't know if he really answered the question, but I just think I was very upset when the bookstore promoted this guy to speak, because I knew who he was. I haven't read his book yet, but I flipped through it, so I could tell it was very one-sided. He completely misses the fact that Antifa was created as a violent movement during the 30s to hurt people.
Right.
He says some different things about, Antifa being created out of the anti-racist action group, which I'm not as familiar with that, but I think that if you're going to use a name that was used, a long time ago, well, it wasn't that long ago to be honest, but back in the 20s and 30s, and the supporters of this group are mostly openly communist.
Right.
I guess some of them consider themselves like anarcho-communists, but I don't really know. Sounds like an oxymoron.
Right.
I don't know how you can be anarchist and communist at the same time.
Yeah.
Socialist maybe, but communist, I don't know. But they wave around the hammer and sickle. They wave around these flags from the USSR. They all hate capitalism. Even Mark Bray himself expressed that he didn't like capitalism, but he's the one selling books and making money off of it. But yeah, I think it's perfectly reasonable for people to come in and expose what's being told as lies. And I've done this before with Refuse Fascism and some of their meetings, when they start going on about white supremacy and start slandering people based on things that aren't facts. And also I've been to other protests as well. And I think that people need to stand up against people who lie and people who say things that are wrong. And that's what I'm here for. I mean, I'm not here to hurt people or promote violence. That's the last thing I want to do. I'm for a free marketplace of ideas, and I stand for absolute free speech, unless you draw the line at violence, and that's what the Constitution says. Is if you specifically call for violence against a group of people or against somebody.
Hmm.
You know.
Well,
So
I did notice, like in the Periscope, that Chris was saying that you were at the time of making that video, there were people that were actually surrounding you from the event. Is that accurate, or?
I'm not really sure actually. I know he had said some things like, people were around us, but I wasn't paying attention. I didn't see anybody who was threatening us while
Right.
we were doing that Periscope.
Okay.
There's nobody that came up to us and said anything, but he had said something um, in in that interview or in that Periscope that said that they're kind of all around us, which I thought was kind of an exaggeration, to be honest. But
Okay. Well, yeah. I just wanted to clear that up.
yeah,
Um.
but yeah, we got kicked out of that event, and we asked them why we were getting kicked out because a person from the audience, after I said Trump, Trump, build a wall, he didn't confront me, as far as I remember. He didn't confront me. He actually confronted somebody else from our group. So I don't know if he recognized this person or what, but he started coming over. He was a tall guy. He had a star tattoo on his neck. I'm not really sure what his name is. But he came over, and he started getting in the face of one of our, somebody in our group. And I don't remember what he was saying, but he was basically intimidating him as he was trying to leave. And he sort of, pushed his way through the guy from our group. I think his name is Chris as well. Another Chris, not Chris Bartley.
Okay.
But he tried to push his way out of the group, and somebody assaulted him while he was leaving. At first, I thought it was a push. I saw from the Boston Herald article that somebody said that somebody threw a book at him. I don't know what happened. I just know that somebody provoked a physical response. The guy from our group turned around, got very angry, and was about to respond to that physical response. Somebody in the Harvard Coop grabbed him and kept him away, and I went over and was trying to tell him, dude, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Don't throw a punch. Just walk away, because it's for light pushing and stuff like that. I honestly think that walking away is the best thing, unless somebody is
Right.
really threatening you, really intimidating you, like what happened to me outside.
Right.
I mean, this is the thing is I had conversations. So I had conversations with that Tyjon Wallace guy. I had conversations with the guy who asked a really good question about Charles Murray, and I think he was the same guy who talked about, heckling is okay, but shutting down free speech is probably a very bad idea. And there was another person outside the event that I was talking to who we were challenging each other on, what we were basically talking about free speech, and we were saying, well, when people joke about certain things, then how does that, how should you respond to that? Because I said some people have sort of a dark humor type of, some people have like, dark humor, dark satire type of way of expressing themselves. And should that be taken it seriously, or should we take it as a joke? So, yeah, we had this conversation. I was about to leave, and that's when I got attacked. So I was just standing outside. I was with the female friend that was in our group in the bookstore. These people came out. They said, he's a Nazi. And immediately, this girl, cocked back and went to punch me. And as I was kind of fighting him off, within seconds, a group of stronger people, I'm assuming they were male, came up from behind me, grabbed me, and started punching me in the face. I fought them off. I don't know if they let go or if I was able to break free just by throwing punches. But I found myself in a situation where I'm in the middle of the sidewalk. The street's behind me, so it's to my back. The coop is in front of me, so that entrance area. I'm on the sidewalk. I have a group of people to the left of me, and I have a group of people to the right of me. And they're all kind of spread out. So I don't know who's who. I don't know who's attacked. I didn't even know who really attacked me at that point and who was still threatening me, because I heard somebody say, "Run, Nazi, run," from the left of me.
Right.
So I'm in this situation, and I know in the video I said, I wanted to get revenge. And a lot of that is true. But at the same time, I don't see how I could have exited that situation in a way that would not promote some or provoke some sort of physical response. Because I had a group of people to the left of me. I had no idea who was who. I had a group of people standing around to the right of me. So it's just like, I guess I could have made a run for it through the crowd, but I mean, I got hit in the head. I just got attacked. So I chose to fight. I mean, that's basically what it was. I chose to fight from the people who were facing me, who were still, to my knowledge, threatening me, saying things to me like "Run, Nazi, run," and so I attacked them. And then again, the group came in, surrounded me, hit me in the face, and somebody from that same group who hit me from before, because I could feel the punches were just as hard, hit me a few times, 3 or 4 times in the face, really hard. And at that point, I was just bleeding everywhere, and I was done. I gave up, and they went off. But it was just very interesting that the people to the right of me were sort of slowly walking. It looked like maybe they were walking away, but they were sort of walking in a direction, and then the people from the left of me were sort of aggressively faced towards me at the time, and provoking me. So I chose to fight, and like I said, I don't think I did anything wrong. I don't think I did anything wrong in the lecture. I don't think I did anything wrong with what I said, and I don't think I did anything wrong with my response.
Right. Yeah. So your heckling at the lecture was like nothing about provoking violence. You had joked.
No.
I just wanted to recap, and then the comments that they had referenced in the Periscope video, where somebody had made a comment on the Periscope that you didn't know, and about punching commies, and you were like, "Oh yeah, well, you punch commies" or something. You said.
Yeah, basically.
And then.
Yeah, I said punch commies, fuck commies.
Okay, yeah.
And
that's what you said, I think.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, it was not a response to say, yeah, it's okay, go out and punch commies. It was just like playing along with this dude who made this comment. And playing along with what Chris had said, because at the time, like I said, I don't know why he said that. I also don't know why he said that's his thing. Because I've never said in the past to punch people. I've never said in the past to hurt people. I mean, I think from the way that I speak, the way that I talk, I seem to be a very calm and non-violent person.
Right. I think, like you said, you're a champion of the free marketplace of ideas and speech and everything. It seems kind of ironic to me that you're. The whole concept of free speech is that having a free marketplace of ideas, you will be the logical, more reasoned discourse will ultimately win, and that's how you kind of deal with speech that is, encouraging things like violence or irrational things like that. But when you have a group that's like Mark Bray has said, I believe he said it even in that lecture, but he said it in previous interviews that he believes certain speech from people who he assigns the label of Nazis should not be allowed, and as if he used the justification that because they're violent or they are going to, they already have control, I believe, that he said something like along those lines, that it's speech doesn't have an effect, so it's not a reasonable thing.
Yeah, that's what these people do. They make this preposterous claim that the police, the government, all these people are in bed with, white supremacists and Nazis and all these different people, which is such a ridiculous claim. And when you ask them to back these things up, all they do is, again, try to intimidate you, try to bully you. It's like So when I look at people who get frustrated and upset and people who really do want to commit violence against these people, it's because they're so frustrated at the fact that nobody wants to talk. People make ridiculous claims. The media supports all these ridiculous claims that are put up there. There's no balanced perspective from any of the media that I've seen so far. The mainstream media. The independent media is the only news source that is telling the truth. And I mean, this was such a huge surprise to me because I didn't find this out until August. So there was the Boston Free Speech rally in August. And like I said on the Alex Jones show, I knew nothing about, the whole free speech movement. I knew nothing about all the different speakers who were getting shut down. And like I said, I was never really a conservative or like right-wing person. So I was still kind of under the more of the narrative that the media was saying about, Trump's this bad, racist, misogynistic person. But at the same time, I also realized this ridiculousness that was coming from the left after I saw, because I subscribed to the Bernie emails, and everything that Trump did provoked such a irrational response from his team, from the media, from everybody else. I saw all these marches. I didn't know anything about the ideas of social justice. Like, I didn't know anything about privilege. I didn't know anything about any of this until I came back. So I took a trip to Europe, actually. I took a year off. I was in the military for 4 years, and after my contract was done, I said I would like to travel. And I would like to kind of just do something for myself for once, because everything that I'd been doing was I feel like sort of achieving what other people thought was best for me. Mm-hmm. So I took a year off, a little over a year off. I went to Western Europe. I went over to the UK, which I loved. I loved the UK. Just really beautiful nature and hiking and scenery, and I felt a connection to a lot of people, especially in Scotland. The people there were really nice. And yeah, London is as bad as they say it is, by the way. I did not like London. I spent 4 days there, and I got the hell out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like I went on this journey to try to understand some things about myself, about the world, about what was going on. And even after that event, I still had a very liberal view on things. But I noticed some things while I was like in Brussels. I was in places, that had been attacked. And I had noticed, I'm like, where is the culture? I thought, well, maybe it's missing because it's a big city. Because often big cities don't tend to have a huge cultural influence. You mostly see it in, I think, the suburbs.
Right.
But when I went in Brussels, there was just like police sirens going all the time. I felt very unsafe there. Like outside of the city center, it was like a third world country. And I just felt things were very sketchy there. I did not like it. I was in Brussels actually when the election happened, and I saw Trump won, and I didn't really have like a breakdown. I said, you know what? We have a Congress that will check and balance what the president does. So if Trump is this really crazy, authoritarian figure and bad guy, then at least we have Congress to sort of figure things out. And I sort of secretly wanted Trump to win. I mean, I kind of wanted Bernie to be written in and win, but I figured that was probably unlikely.
Right.
But if I had another choice, I was thinking Trump was the lesser of all the evils. But I didn't feel like I could express that to people. And I think I was also doubting myself because of the media opinion of who he was.
Right.
So it's like when Trump won, I was kind of secretly happy. But I knew a lot of people that freaked out. But I was just like, I was also sort of just happy because I didn't like Clinton at all. I didn't like what Clinton stood for. I saw all these social justice warriors who I didn't even really know what they were fighting for. It just seemed like they were anti-Trump and they just wanted to riot. But I started, and that's kind of what I focus on now, is sort of these ideas of social justice. I listen to a lot of people who speak out against social justice and Black Lives Matter and third wave feminism, and a lot of these different, I call them collectivist groups, because they sort of sacrifice the individual for their collective ideology.
Right.
And a lot of what they say, and this is the thing, like, I think I said this as well, is some of us could probably find common ground. I could definitely find common ground with, like, a Black Lives Matter person who was able to reasonably sit down with me and talk about the issues. Because there's a lot of things that I'm like, yeah, I would like to change that. But ultimately, I'm a person that says, like many other, right-wing people, you can't blame other people for your life and your actions. So when we talk about poverty, when we talk about fatherless homes, when we talk about the crime rates and things like that, I mean, yes, we would love to make legislation to fix things, but it doesn't seem like these people are interested in making any sorts of legislation to. Well, they don't want to find common ground. They will only support you if you completely support everything that they stand for, and it's like that's unrealistic in general. Like, I would love to see all my ideas come to fruition, but the thing is like, in a marketplace of ideas and also in just like the world, you're never going to get a perfect situation like that.
Right. I mean,
you're always going to have to make sacrifices, I think.
It seemed like, per your point about the Black Lives Matter and the different social justice areas and whatnot, it seems that every time a group springs up like this to deal with an issue that is an issue, like police brutality or criminal justice accountability,
yeah.
Every time something like that comes up, there's a branch that tries to come in and usurp and declare themselves the figurehead for the movement of that, and then kind of piggyback off of that into other things and kind of hijacks the whole. It's like a branding type thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think that is what Black Lives Matter kind of devolved into, was almost like an offshoot of the Black Panthers kind of like mentality of, and it's not even about like police brutality now. Now we're seeing like end capitalism is supposedly the racism thing. It's like the most counterintuitive thing you could possibly think of, but.
Well, yeah, and that was, I went to a Democratic Socialists of America meeting, and they were talking about introduction to Marxism, and one of the statements that was made was capitalism, like racism is a product of capitalism. And I raised my hand and I challenged that. I said, I think that's a bit of a stretch. I said, because I used the example of Native Americans. And I said, well, Native Americans were never really a peaceful, they weren't all peaceful.
Right.
And so it's like a lot of Native Americans, and this is from research that I've done and from what I've read, and, if somebody has a response to this, like, I'm perfectly willing to listen to it. But from what I've seen, there were groups of tribes of Native Americans who actually partnered with European settlers to try to fight off and destroy other tribes because they hated them. So they completely hated other tribes as a group. And is that not the definition of racism? Like, to hate somebody based upon their group identity?
Right.
And I guess whether that would be considered race or prejudice, to me, it seems very similar. I mean, whether it's based on race, whether it's based on sexual orientation, whether it's based on, some sort of identity, I think lumping everybody into that group and expressing hatred and wanting to hurt, them is a form of racism, I guess, or a form of, basically, it's bad. That's kind of what I think. I think they're just as bad. Racism, legit sexism, because people throw that around a lot too, that this is sexist, and I think that most of the time that's ridiculous. Because people do have alternative theories to the women's movement, the third wave feminism, and really, with all these groups, the only thing that I see in common is they just want power, because they all express kind contempt or whatever for the fact that their people are not in power. So the third wave feminism movement is upset because there's not enough females in power, as they say. Black Lives Matter say there's not enough African Americans in power. Social justice says there's not enough minorities in power, but they don't account for the fact that there's people who make individual choices, whether or not they want to make good choices or bad choices. There needs to be some sort of individual responsibility. And I also don't think that they realize that when you start collectively trying to boost people based upon like things like race, instead of like if they started talking about economic status, and they started saying, well, maybe we start to look at people in different economic brackets. Maybe we try to give people who come from a poor background like some sort of step up. And I could probably compromise with that, but at the same time, I do disagree with that because I feel like in life you have to work for what you earn. You have to, when you look at people who live in third world countries and charities that end up giving a lot of things to people in third world countries, they often end up still in the same situation. They end up in a poor situation. They end up kind of relying on these handouts, for lack of a better term, and they don't really learn anything of how to get out of their struggle, get out of their situation, and to become successful. And I think that if we really want to look at how to solve this problem, we can definitely look at legislation in terms of education. I think that should be a major focus, is trying to make sure we get better schools in these areas. But I've also heard arguments that there are really good teachers, but the problems are the students. And the students don't want to, they don't have the drive, the motivation to work hard in these sort of poor economic areas.
Right. I think that kind of dovetails into, there's a whole bunch of different issues that can, that's a very complex issue to kind of break down. But I think that kind of dovetails into a whole
that could be a completely different conversation. But that's what I'm focusing on, and that's what I want. That's the conversation that I want to promote, and I want people to realize that by talking about these things and by saying the things that I'm saying, that I know a lot of other people are saying. Some are saying it in more blunt ways than I am saying, but these conversations need to be had, and people who have alternating opinions to these collectivist groups are not inherently bad or racist or sexist or whatever. All these terms that they use, the ists, I guess, the ists and isms,
right,
that they tend to throw out so liberally, that they label you as. It's a bullying tactic, as like Ben Shapiro says. It's basically to silence people. And I have a hard time respecting them because I see what's going on. I also see the actions that are taken within these groups to try to silence people who have alternating opinions. I watched a documentary, and I'll finish up on this topic just with this so we can move on to any other questions that you have. But sure. I watched a documentary of like kind of behind the scenes of Black Lives Matter and a lot of these different groups. And there's a lot of communist socialist influence. So there are sort of, from what I've seen, the main sort of, behind the scenes leadership behind Black Lives Matter is more of a communist movement. And the people who have sort of brainwashed these kids into thinking these sort of things have planned out a way to gather people and protect them and sort of brainwash them from opposing opinions. Right. And I think that's why we're seeing such the backlash from these groups, such that, the anger, the frustration, because it's all, I think, a part of the plan to work towards this sort of socialist communist utopia that they dream is going to happen. Because you go to any of these meetings for like DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, other socialist groups, they all advocate intersectionality. They all advocate these critical race theory ideas. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
no, I agree. I think there's definitely an underlying. Um, they're
yeah,
definitely kind of those all those different groups kind of work to isolate people and from challenging perspectives, which is why groups like your Boston Free Speech or Resist Marxism rallies, they're challenging these types of things and going to these events to challenge people like Mark Bray who are specifically organizing groups to shut down um, perspectives and ideas and information that challenges these people and their thoughts about the world and everything. So it's definitely kind of enlightening as far as the resist Marxism stuff goes, because you have Mayor Marty Walsh, who was as you know, had shut down the Boston Free Speech based on, or he didn't allow them to have different things like amplification to get their message out after labeling them Nazis. There were a bunch
yeah,
of 20,000 people showed up to protest these people. They couldn't talk. They couldn't give their speech out to kind of nullify the misinformation out there about their um, that they had been believed to be true. So it's kind of like what you're seeing here is like they're shutting you down from expressing your views. So I just want to, I don't know if you had a comment about the different kinds of things like that you've seen in Boston.
yeah. So I've been met with hostility from all of these different groups. The Boston Free Speech event in August, I wasn't actually there. Like I said, I kind of got woken up because I stumbled upon all the various articles of the people who marched out there. And when I was trying to find some sort of video of the event, I was struggling. And then I finally stumbled upon, I think it was either Joe Biggs or Stickman's video. And I looked at it and I said, this isn't hurt. This isn't hateful. This isn't anything. Like, these are a lot of the same views that I sort of express about some of these different groups and how we need to fix the problems. And, I never found that it was hateful for me to say these things. But, yeah, so I saw that, I mean, you could basically say that August's speech rally was shut down because people weren't let in to hear the speakers. There are people that were physically shut out from the event. They made it seem like there was only about 50, 40 or 50 people who showed up that day, when really there were more. They scared people into not showing up because, people know about the trends of violence with these types of groups. And so, even major figureheads had also said from experience from Berkeley and from other places, it's like, I'm not showing up to that to get beat up or to possibly get killed. So they basically shut that down. And after that, I started doing some research, started learning a lot of things. I went to a protest down at Harvard. There was a Betsy DeVos protest, and they were, really upset about Title IX. I didn't know about the educational perspective of it. They're really upset at Title IX. All I did during the speeches was I held up a sign, and it just said, "Say no to feminist propaganda," and it had a description of the Red Pill movie by Cassie J, which is something I watched, which I thought was really eye-opening. So I held that sign up, and it was just like people were telling me to leave. People were trying to block my sign. One guy was intimidating me. He's like, because I was just having fun with it. These guys were trying to block my sign, and I was kind of just messing around with the signs and putting it in front and kind of, doing different things because I think that their response is so irrational. And one guy says, if you touch their sign one more time, you're going to be sorry. And I looked at him, I said, what are you going to do? There's police everywhere. I said, if you try to do something, you're going to get arrested. Like, what's your problem? And I had many people who were very upset. But just like I said, I think it's a huge double standard Because every time you go to these events, and I think that I've tried to be as respectful as possible, and I've let people speak, and I've never really interrupted anybody while they were speaking.
Right.
But I've gone to that event. I went to the Refuse Fascism event that was talking about fascism on campus, and I also challenged them with my questions. And somebody said something about free speech is about white supremacy, and I said that's not true. And they also said that Puerto Rico was genocide. I said that's not true either. But it's like when people make outlandish lies and statements, do they not expect somebody from the crowd to speak up and at least say something like that's not true or you're lying?
Well, I think that's the point here. Is like there's a trend here. Is like what's happening is they're not preventing the like people to. They're selectively preventing certain speech that to allow for the in this case slanderous statements like that to be
Yeah.
dismantled, and through obviously making your own statements and letting people hear from what you yourself were saying. Like
I
this
mean,
person coming up to you and just calling you a Nazi, and then a bunch of people attacking you. It's kind of like, is that the world you want to live in America? I mean, supposedly the fascism that we're fighting, if they're, it's just kind of a little bit of a mind bend here. What we're seeing
yeah.
is, so it's like,
It's not from us. The violence is not coming from the right. What happened in Charlottesville was a horrible thing, but that was an incident that, like I said, I can't blame the city, but I can say that their response to trying to shut down free speech uh, was a factor, I think, in the attack of what happened. Because I think if they would have just let that event happen, and I think if those protesters would have peacefully protested instead of coming in with violence, I think that that event would have been fine. I think that they would have gone, they would have said their thing, they would have left, and I don't think that, like, I wouldn't have known about any of these groups if Charlottesville didn't happen. I mean, maybe I would have stumbled upon it, like, with people that, I follow, like Dave Rubin and some other people who have talked about it, but, like, I just think that the idea of shutting down speech is always a bad idea. And we saw it in Charlottesville. We saw it historically with groups like Antifa in the 20s and 30s. I don't necessarily, I can't necessarily say that, Hitler wouldn't have risen to power if these groups didn't exist. But there was definitely a lot of meddling done by communist socialist parties in Western democratic countries. And the whole plan was to basically, Antifa, I say, is the arm of the USSR because they wanted to try to spread their ideology to the West. And so from my point, and from, I think, historians, they have said that the idea of fighting against fascism and fighting against Mussolini and Nazi Germany was really just a propaganda front
right.
to fuel the communist movement. And so just like in that era, we're seeing the same exact thing now where people are getting brainwashed into using violence to shut down people who are, so-called fascists. And when you ask them to define what fascism is, they can't answer you. They don't know what it means. And it's like, I could look to the dictionary. I could tell you what fascism is now. I could give you a definition of it, or at least my interpretation of it. But these people, they can't. Because they've lied and they've used this framework as justification for committing violence against people that they don't like.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely think there's a little bit of irony there where a lot of people just don't really know what they're talking about. I think it's almost like you said, there's kind of a sentiment that people have that they're trying to see fulfilled, like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they kind of have blinders on as they're making their way through different things, and when it comes to different perspectives. So that's in part why I believe that things that your group is doing, Resist Marxism, is very important, and I definitely appreciate, I can speak for a lot of people, or the things you do when you go out and confront people, Mark Bray specifically, and other people at those events with ideas. So because that's
Yeah.
essentially the what needs to happen if we're going to get through a period peacefully, which is unfortunately what I don't think these groups want. I think that's actually what they're trying to do here. So
I lose hope every day, to be honest. Like, I know that these people don't want us to talk, but sometimes I didn't know who was going to show up to this lecture. I expected a little bit more people who were, I would say, were like liberal, as opposed to people who were, I would say, more far left. But I think there was a high concentration of people who were, leftist, more extreme left, social justice, warrior type people. And sometimes when you go to these things and you start, saying different things that make sense, people wake up and people say, oh, that makes sense. It happened when I was in the Refuse Fascism meeting. There was a guy in that meeting who wanted to ask me a question because of what I said. Just like in this meeting, the guy who talked about shutting down speech, we also had a good conversation. So it's like people want to have conversations at these meetings. And like I said, I think confronting them and just at least showing that not everybody agrees with this needs to be done. Especially at Mark Bray and Antifa events, because what they're doing is extremely unjust.
absolutely, I agree with you 100%. I think
and you look at his Twitter too. I mean, he openly advocates for groups that have been violent in the past, like Berkeley Antifa, who have hurt innocent people. He does interviews with these Antifa folk, and he has not once said that he denounces violence from these groups. I mean, from my point of view, I would say that these groups are domestic terrorist groups, and if you associate with these groups, you should be prosecuted the same way as being a member of the group itself.
Yeah, I think definitely when you encourage violence, I think that's definitely something that needs to be looked at specifically. You can't be going around encouraging violence because you believe somebody's a fascist or you have defined that person as such. I think it's kind of very wishy-washy kind of territory you're getting into there. And like as you said, the 20s and 30s, the Antifa there, it was largely used as justification for more fascist type control measures by the government. So it makes you wonder what if there's all sorts of history of programs of governments using groups like this to leverage control and do all these other things. So
look at the Weather Underground. That was also another group that was trying to start, some sort of revolution like this. A group that now the leader has not been criminalized, was the mentor of Obama, or I guess Obama was the mentor of him, and it's just like this guy has not gone to jail. This guy has not received any criminal prosecution. So there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things coming up, but yeah, I just think, and I'm not a person either. I hate this whole witch hunt. I hate the witch hunt that people go out, especially on television, and say, oh, you said this. Now we have to start figuring out who you are as a person. And I mean, and nothing against you, but it's just like, this video that came out, and now people are saying, oh, well, he asked for it. And it's just like, do we really have to go through this? Like, I get so sick of this because it limits real conversations.
Absolutely.
Because all this group is trying to do, they're trying to point to something that they can somehow blame you for. I bet you none of those people watched that Periscope until after the fact. And so they saw that and they were like, oh, now we've got something.
Right.
So it's just, it's a huge witch hunt. The whole idea of, denouncing all these different people. But I think in the Mark Bray case, if you're associating yourself with a domestic terrorist group, you're sort of posting things that say smash the fash and all different types of things, then it starts to get into a point where it's like, okay, what do you represent? And maybe you should be saying something like violence is not okay. and you're writing books about Antifa, you're spreading lies about Antifa, um, it's like, should that person be held responsible? And that's what I'm looking to try to do. I am trying to hold him and the groups that attacked me responsible for what had happened, and also Marty Walsh and the city, because their slanderous statements that they did not take back or even apologize for, could be said that people continue to think that we are Nazis or bad people because of what was written. And you can blame the media, you can blame Marty Walsh, you can blame the commissioner, police commissioner, Governor Baker, all these people who said that we were this hateful group and specifically said something about Nazis.
Right, exactly.
So it's just like, I want to take everybody down, to be honest. I want to take everybody down because I think people should be held responsible for this. And you can't go around, especially when you're a public official, you can't go around and say things that are untrue and not come back and say, oh, I'm sorry. It's like, I understand that he can't necessarily express support for our group because, we don't necessarily support very liberal ideologies. But the least he could say is that violence is not the answer. The people that committed violence at the rally are wrong. And he could also say that we are not Nazis and that we are not a hate group.
Right.
So I think those statements are all valid, and I think that's something that he could express. He doesn't have to support us. He doesn't have to say that, that he supports what we represent. But he could at least say, he could at least state the facts, and he could say that we are not what was represented as who we are. And also that we have nothing to do with Charlottesville, because I'm so sick of that question. The journalists always want to ask that question. Charlottesville, Charlottesville, Charlottesville. It's like they know that we're not related to them, but they still want to scoop up that story. They still want to drive hysteria. And it gets very frustrating.
Absolutely, yeah. There's definitely an effort, I'd say, to associate pretty much any unsanctioned ideas with like white supremacy or neo-Nazism or any other kind of extreme kind of thing, when in actuality it's pretty much like you said, it's all these people kind of partitioning different groups in an effort to
exert power.
Them. Right.
Yeah, to manage them, make sure that they don't hear any opinions or any views that don't line up with it, to sort of train them to react violently and in an intimidating way when they hear opposing views, and also to try to exert power. I mean, it's a definition of a bully, and I just think it's shameful when you express, "Hey, I'm being bullied," and then they start saying, "Oh, well, now you know how it feels like." It's like, that is just sick and wrong to me. It's just like, you don't know my life. You don't know anybody's life. You don't know how I grew up or anybody else. People have different experiences. People are individuals.
Yeah.
I
think that's what's missing from the concept of communism, I guess, and other
groupthink ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. Well.
So yeah, I just wanted to confront these people. I wanted to expose them. And like I said, I don't think I did anything wrong. I don't condone violence. But at the same time, I also lose hope every day. And I would just wonder at some point whether or not we're going to have to take a offensive position towards all this. Because if people keep getting hurt, I think the thing is like, if somebody on our side gets killed because of this, there's going to be extreme outrage. And I know that there's extreme outrage just from what happened to me. I mean, people see my face, people see who I am. They listen to me talk. They realize that I'm just a normal person, and I'm a pretty passive person, to be honest. And people are really pissed off, and so it's just like, I would not like to see the country come to that, but sometimes I wonder, is it going to have to come to that? Is it going to get so bad that there's going to be, some sort of civil unrest?
Yeah, well, I'd agree with you, but hopefully we can keep on marching forward with the speech. Call people like Marty Walsh out who are restricting it, and Mark
Yeah, that's what I hope to
Bray.
do. I hope to, call these people out, do everything with legal action, and, if people, if the police does not cooperate, because they've been very silent in the last few days. I've not heard from them.
Yeah, that's what I was
Uh,
going to ask you about. If you had heard anything from the police or investigators.
no. And I've heard nothing from them. We called them on Saturday night to express that they need to call the coop and they need to get in touch with other people to get this video surveillance. Because if this video surveillance gets destroyed, then, well, I say it's a lost cause, but then you also have the right to take legal action against these people, against the police force, against the people who deleted the video.
Right.
I mean, I think, and the coop is not cooperating with us at all. From the Jordan, I forget his name, but the Boston Herald guy, he said he reached out to Mark Bray and his team, and he reached out to the coop, and they provided no comment on what happened. So the coop is getting a lot of pressure for this, and I just think this is a big issue, and I think that a lot of people could potentially get shut down because of what happened.
Absolutely.
I mean, the coop brought in this guy to speak, guy who openly condones violence.
Right.
And I've confronted the coop before about their displays, which I think perpetrate hatred towards Trump supporters and towards just, white people in general. I have a picture of one of their displays where it just talks about genocide. It's just right there, all grouped together. And it has the Antifa handbook. It has the No book by Naomi Klein, which is like the anti-Trump book or something. It has Bernie. It has Capital by Karl Marx. Has a couple books that say white rage, white trash, and then books that talk about, sort of the civil rights movement, being stampeded out, and another one about Native American genocide. And it's like, what is this message sending out to people who walk by this? What is this message trying to state? And I confronted them. I said, this is very one-sided. And one of the employees had said, yeah, I actually agree with you. He said, I'll try to let somebody know. He said other people had expressed concern about this display. But it's like, it's been there for a couple months now, and it's not been, I think maybe they put a couple new books in there, but it's the same message with sort of this hatred that as a race, it's just I say it's racist, even though some people will say it's not, because we have, white people have the power or whatever, which I think is just a preposterous statement. But it's reverse racism basically, and I think it is just as bad as if anybody were to put books that talked about hating towards any other ethnic group. Yeah. So, but this is the environment. This is what we're seeing. This is something that I've been harassed about. I've been harassed for being a white male. I think other people have been harassed for this, and I think it's wrong. We need to have conversations. We don't need to start hating on people. It starts to promote hate from others, and I think it's just ironic that they say that they're anti-racist, anti-hate, but they're continuing to spew hateful things.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. There seems to be a concerted effort across various college campuses to kind of indoctrinate people into kind of hate America type of mentality,
yeah.
in concert with other efforts to kind of usurp national sovereignty. So it almost makes you wonder about there's different things going on in the global geopolitical stage. Makes you wonder if there's any connections here trying to pretty much integrate the United States into a more even bigger government. But we'll see what's going on in that regard. I'm sure in the near future.
It's perfectly reasonable to think that. Um, I am new to this, so I'm not really as up to date with like the globalist movement, um, which is something, to be honest, I thought was ridiculous at one time. But now that I'm seeing these key players who are having a huge influence on different parts of society, it makes me think, and I'm like, maybe there is some plan. But I think that the biggest threat to the United States right now is from communist, socialist groups that are playing in the background to try to influence um, hysteria and chaos in our society. And you can trace back Antifa, you can trace back Refuse Fascism, you can trace back all these different groups to communist movements. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm fighting against it, because I know if this happens, the West is destroyed. If we lose free speech, if we honestly lose free speech and we become like Canada and the UK, I think people are going to really lose hope. Like,
well, I think now what we're seeing, which is kind of an interesting thing, just to kind of throw this in there and maybe get a comment from you about
sure.
the stuff Donald Trump, President Trump, just retweeted. Jada Franson, who was an outspoken critic of Islam and various things about Islam, and she herself is being threatened with prison time for being a critic of just speaking about the different problems of Islam in the UK, and now we're kind of seeing that kind of thing. The speeches, they're kind of trying to use hate speech as a way that we can't criticize irrational, illogical things in institutions.
Exactly.
Now it's like,
yeah, and then they're trying to use, and it's been used against me already, because on Twitter I follow people from very many different perspectives. Does not mean I endorse them. Does not mean I endorse everything that they say. But like I said, I am for a free marketplace of ideas, and I think that the way that you can combat bad ideas is by understanding where they're coming from and picking out the good with the bad. And when you start equating, the Trump sort of civic nationalist movement with the white nationalist movement, there are overlapping areas, but it kind of stops at the ethno-state. Like,
right, yeah.
I think that it's like,
you can be white and still be and be a nationalist and not be a white nationalist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can still express problems with mass immigration. You can still express, cultural problems with, and crime rates and things like that. That's what we're seeing, I think, with Islam. And again, I've listened to Jada speak a little bit. I disagree with her when she says that Islam has absolutely no place in the UK, and that it seems like she's advocating more of a Christian nation. And I understand what she's saying, because there is kind of an advantage to having one ideology that sort of reigns supreme, I guess, for lack of better terms. But
right.
Like when you look at the Amish, for example, they have their problems, of course, but they all unite under a Christian doctrine, which I think kind of sets their value systems up. And like I said, you can have disagreements, you can have issues, but they're able to, I think, relate to each other and talk to each other more because they follow this one ideology. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, in a country or in an environment, when you have people from very opposing ideologies and different groups, there's going to be some sort of conflict.
Right.
And when you look at Islam, it's another one of those things. When you start looking at Antifa and people who kind of silently promote violence, is, Islam doesn't silently promote it. It actually explicitly does, from what I've seen. But, it's an idea of, when we look at Christianity, it also had some things in the book that were not good and that were violent. and I do not agree with. But you see that we have, the Christian community has transformed itself into, I think, a non-violent religion. And they realize that, well, yes, I disagree with these people, but obviously I'm not going to try to eliminate them from society.
Right.
When you look at Islam, when you look at the historical past of how it was used as sort of a very conquering type religion, and how the book continues to kind of explicitly state that Allah is supreme, and that non-believers should be beheaded, and all these different things, I have yet to hear except for one. I think there's a guy I follow on Twitter. He's an imam, and he actually is a Muslim that he's either a Muslim or ex-Muslim who actually says this is wrong.
Right.
But I have yet to hear the Muslim community explicitly say something like, we don't follow these parts of the religion, and
Right.
we think that those ideas are bad in this current society. But yeah, I mean, people don't realize that when you look at the Middle East right now, there's a lot of fundamentalist Islamic people. And it's not to say that they're all bad, but you have to, it's like if you knew that a certain group of people had a higher, I'm forgetting the word, but like, I think that if you were to open up your home, you would be much more cautious about who they are and who they come from. And I think most people here in the United States, I mean, we haven't seen the problems that we see in Europe, but most people in the United States, I think, when they see Muslim people, they don't immediately associate them with something bad.
Right.
Because I do think that it is possible to moderately, I guess, practice Islam. But I still have yet to read the Quran. There's a guy I follow, his name's Tommy Robinson, and he's been criticized as well in the past for being a violent person. I don't know his full story, but I listen to him talk now, and from what I've heard him say, I don't disagree. I think he's a good person from what I see, and it seems like he just wants to expose the religion for what it is, and he has ex-Muslim support behind him, along with other people who say, I got out of this religion because of these problems,
Right.
and are speaking out. And the thing is the people that speak out against it, when people criticize Christianity, some people get pissed off and they're like, oh man, these people are assholes or whatever. But nobody is saying these people need to be hurt, injured, killed,
Right.
But when you criticize Islam, for some reason, it's like the end of the world, and it's like people are trying to beat you up, people are trying to kill you,
Yeah, well, here's my opinion on the thing: is you have the Christianity ideal, right? Which is kind of it's a tough thing to kind of idealize, because if everybody was truly a Christian, they'd be following after Jesus Christ, right? And then they'd be following his kind of life tenets. And to be honest, most people that call them Christians don't really do that, so it's hard to really But you have.
I was just gonna say they select, I think, what fits their morality.
Right.
I think this is something that I don't know if it was Richard Dawkins or some other more. Richard Dawkins says he's a secular Christian, but I guess he's an atheist. But this is what many people say is of course, when you read, when Christians read the book, and in most Christian societies, they look at it from balancing their own morality along with what the book says, and I think that's what normal people do,
Right.
But what we're seeing in the Middle East from a lot of people is there isn't that. There isn't that sort of fundamental good that people see within themselves. And not to say that they're fundamentally bad people.
Right.
It's just they're in this environment where these belief systems are reinforced, and
I think the cult system is it's more of a cult system where it discourages people from kind of falling out of the ideology, like we were discussing with the Antifa type of thing, is like
Yeah.
they do this kind of cult kind of brainwashing of people that kind of discourages that. That's why I think that there's a very important distinguishing factor that that people like need to be aware of when it comes to Christianity and like the Western values and everything
Yeah.
versus Islamic. Because if you're looking into if you want to realize the full uh, the full Christian teachings, you're going. It's not like you're fully realizing you're gonna have to like kill the infidels or whatever. You're
Yeah.
fully
Yeah.
realizing, you know what I mean? Like, because
Yeah,
every religion,
it does not explicitly state in the Bible that it says do not associate with non-believers. It does not say kill non-believers. Islam says kill non-believers.
right?
So, I think that there's a fundamental difference between what the Bible says and what the Quran says about how to interact with people that don't follow your religion. And this is another issue that's been brought up by many people who oppose Islam is when you try to leave that community, you are an outcast, but at the same time, you are looked upon as somebody who deserves death. And I've heard people say, "Oh, that's not true. That's not true." But the thing is actions speak louder than words. When you look at these communities, that's what's happening. People who are ex-Muslim are getting executed or getting killed, and people who commit commit acts that are against that religion are being stoned or being thrown off roofs. It's just like the way it is practiced in Muslim majority countries is a very fundamentalist way, from what I've seen.
Right.
And I think that's why many people have a problem with Islam and with bringing people from that region into the United States, because it's like Sharia law does not work with the Constitution. These ideas do not work with our sort of Western values, our sort of free speech, openness, our ideas of freedom of assembly and freedom of being able to freedom of association. So
I think that's what I feel is definitely something that needs to go forward with, as far as dealing with groups like Antifa that are using these kind of tactics, these linguistic kind of things to circumvent rational reasoned thought. Whereas like if somebody's coming in and you can't just say freedom of religion, or this is my right, and then like all of a sudden it doesn't apply in this other case, because if it doesn't matter if your religion, what if your religion is to kill people, or if your religion is to do something stupid
exactly.
like that?
It has to match up with the law. So it has to be within the law. And what we're seeing in Europe, especially Sweden. I mean, I heard reports that Sweden is now considered a third world country because of the amount of rapes that have happened, in Sweden. And also, they've had a lot of bombings. They've had a lot of issues. There's police. They want to have a police presence for female joggers. I mean, it's getting really bad. And it's just like, I think it's a shame that we can't try to, it's like, I just as much as I think anybody else would love to help these people, would love to offer them, a better life. But when you have a large majority of people from these regions committing crimes, committing violent actions, it makes it very difficult to kind of vet, who's good, who's bad. And I understand the reasoning for people to say, you know what, we're just going to completely cut off all immigration from those regions, and we're going to say enough is enough. I don't really like that, mentality, but I understand where it comes from.
Right.
I wish there was a better way. I wish there was a way that we could vet people more closely, but it just doesn't seem like that's happening.
No. I think that's like a very reasonable thing to say, too, and to expect of any people who wants to identify as a nation state, which is unfortunately, I think, something that the agenda is being pushed not to be it's going to be some kind of like Nazi type of association, that if you want a nation state, or if you want to have a nation or any kind of representation, it's kind of like a deemed a Nazi kind of talking point, which is kind of bizarre, but
It's pretty ridiculous, and they're trying to look at like Poland, who has been very anti-Islamic, and trying to make them look bad. And it's like, you look at Poland, I don't think there's been a single terrorist attack in Poland. So it's just like they're kind of doing something right.
Their Christmas markets aren't needing to be barred off by
yeah, by what is it? Present barriers.
Yeah,
so they got the barriers with the gift wrap over top of it.
Yeah,
I saw that and I was like, wow, that's. I would rather them just not even put the gift wrapping on it. I just think that makes it worse.
Yeah, it just kind of hides the fact that what's the reality. It was just a good analysis for what's happening in our society. I'd say a good representation.
Yeah, do people actually fall for that? Like, do people actually look at those, Christmas present barriers and say, "Oh, that's nice. That's such a good protection thing," Because I was at the main Christmas market in Strasbourg in France, and it was tight security, and if you wanted to go in, they were checking your bags, they were checking everything, and 2 weeks before I was there, they actually, I think, raided somebody's home and captured somebody who was planning to commit a terrorist attack in that city. Which was a little scary to me, because I was like, wow, if I would have been there, like if they wouldn't have stopped these people, could I have been hurt or killed? Right. And I was also in Paris around the time where, over by the Louvre, the museum,
yep.
The guy with the knife or the hatchet or whatever had charged one of the police officers. And I was in the city that morning. I wasn't over by the Louvre, but I was still in Paris at that time.
Yeah.
So it was just like, I went out there because I said, you know what, I'm not going to let these people put fear into me.
Right.
My parents disliked the fact that I was going to Europe because they said it was very dangerous. But I said, you know what, this is what I want to do. And this is, these people want you to limit, you have to use common sense, of course. But at the same time, it's like these people that live in these areas still have to go about their daily business as well. Right. So I'm not going to let these people scare me. And especially with this attack, I'm not going to let these people defeat me. They can break my face, they can break my bones, but they're not going to break my will.
Well, that's good to hear, because I think you're having a profound effect on the way people are kind of viewing the whole kind of rhetoric that's been pushed by the mainstream media and the left in particular over the past, the election cycle and everything.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I think, needed at a time where we've seen this kind of divisive campaign rhetoric from both sides in effect, but I'd say more so, especially with identity politics of the left and being driven by different things. But
yeah, I mean, identity politics, I think, from the left, also from sort of the rise of the white nationalist movement.
Yes.
And I mean, like I said, civic nationalism and white nationalism do have a lot of overlapping type responses, and I just think it's really stupid of people to look at the two things and say, oh, well, white nationalists support Trump, so of course he's a white nationalist. It's like, where do you get that? Like, it's kind of ridiculous, And people might say, oh, well, Mark Bray, because you equate one of his supporters with committing violence. It's like, no, this is consistent. It's consistent on what he said. It's consistent on what he's written. It's consistent on the groups that showed up that were specifically Antifa. Black Rose Antifa showed up, and other Antifa groups showed up to that event. So, when people say that, it's just like, come on, like, are you serious?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's it's indisputable. I don't think Mark Bray would even dispute it. To be honest, he's openly advocating violence for preemptive violence
Yeah.
against people. So
Yeah, I'm hoping to confront him or have him respond to this in some way. I haven't heard anything from his end. He won't respond from the Herald article. And yeah, like I said, I want to get my story out there. I want it to go national, and I want him to be called out for what he's done. Because I think if he goes down or if he looks bad because of this, I think that there could be a lot of change, with what's going on in the country.
right, I agree, absolutely. I think there's definitely needs to start holding people accountable for uh, making incendiary statements like that, and
Yeah.
that he has. But Matthias, I think we got a good interview here.
Yeah, it's been quite a while, but like I'm a talker, so.
Oh no, it's great. We got lots of good information here. Um, well, I wish you luck. Um,
Yeah.
and hopefully we hear from the police in the investigation into finding any people who are responsible. It's definitely another thing to keep an eye on in regards to that. Definitely want to make sure our criminal justice system is doing their job. But thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out to me.